It's no secret that Toyota hasn't really wanted to make electric cars, instead deciding to focus on hydrogen fuel cell vehicles and, of course, its hybrid drivetrain technology.
But that's really odd because Toyota has actually built two really solid electric vehicles in the past.
Well, Kate says two, but it's really one and a half. There was the original Toyota RAV4 EV, which both Kate and myself managed to own examples of. That was a car that was developed at the end of the 1990s and sold in Japan from 1997, 1998 onwards, and then over here in North America from the turn of the century. But most of those cars were either crushed because they were leased, watch Who Killed the Electric Car, or they were very rarely sold to end consumers just at the end of their production run, which is how we happened to have one. But then in 2012, Toyota decided to make the RAV4 EV Gen 2. I say decided to. It was a compliance car built to satisfy zero emission regulations in the state of California and a handful of other states that followed California's lead. But it wasn't actually built per se by Toyota.
Well, the body was, but at that time, Toyota had a, shall we say, close relationship with Tesla, and Tesla basically shoehorned in the drivetrain from a Model S and a chunky battery pack and said, it's an electric Toyota. And it was extremely popular, although again, sold in really limited numbers.
The problem with that car was that Toyota wasn't interested in fixing them and keeping them on the road, and Tesla really wasn't interested in keeping them on the road either. And occasionally one will pop up on Craigslist or eBay or Auto Trader, but most people who know electric cars and aren't DIY enthusiasts steer well clear. Which brings us to this. This is the BZ4X. It's Toyota's first all-electric model to be sold outside of Japan since the 2012 Toyota RAV4 EV. And the name BZ4X reminds me of Star Trek, as does the platform this car is built on, the eTNGa. I think it's a sign, Kate.
I think it's probably not, but let's go with it. Let's run with it.
Anyway, there are 3 cars that are now in production that are being sold built on the eTNGa platform. Should have been the 1701A platform if you ask me. Anyway, there's this, which is available in both front wheel and all-wheel drive format. There's the Lexus 450e, which we're going to be getting in about a month's time to put through its paces, and it comes with a yoke. And then there is, of course, the Subaru Solterra, which is this in a different frock. So today, we're going to put this car through its paces, give you our verdict, and instead of having a separate walk around, well, we're going to discuss some of the specs while we're behind the wheel. Kate, it's all yours. You have the con.
Controlled by some strings, it's killing me 'cause I just can't say what I mean. And everywhere I go is the wrong place to be. I think I should go home, but I don't know where it is. Bring it back to me, bring it back to me, bring it back to me. It's making me feel so weak. Bring it back.
So this is the Toyota BZ4X or BZ4X. I don't like saying Z.
No, if we have to call it the Z4X, BZ4X, which is what Toyota say you have to call it. This is going to be a long video of me pausing to go, Z.
The version we're in today is the limited front-wheel drive rather than the limited all-wheel drive. So it has the smaller motor. It's also the second heaviest variant of this car.
It is, but it also has not quite the longest, the second longest range.
Yeah, 242 miles or 389 kilometers. That's on the EPA test cycle. which doesn't feel like saying much these days, because long range, you want it to be longer than that, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to try and pitch it as the long-range vehicle, but also I'm not very convinced that number's terribly attainable.
Well, I've not seen anything more than 208 miles this week. I don't know about you.
Yeah, when it was fully charged, I think it said 204 after you drove it up.
But the all-wheel drive has worse range. So if you want the best range, you have to go with the XLE front-wheel drive. You get the all-wheel drive variants of either stripe, and you're going to have dramatically reduced. I mean, the limited all-wheel drive is 222 miles, which is just 357 kilometres. And interestingly, I think you were saying this earlier, it has the slower rapid charging.
Yeah, I mean, the way that the spec sheets are laid out on this vehicle is frankly quite weird. I don't understand how they've come up with the decisions to which vehicle gets which battery pack and which vehicle gets which charging, because it really feels like the all-wheel drive should be the all singing, all dancing, have the bigger battery pack, have the faster charging.
But that's not the case.
But yeah, I think isn't the battery pack is about 500 watt hours bigger or something
Right,
like
so
that?
the limited front-wheel drive and the XLE front-wheel drive both have a 71.4 kilowatt-hour battery pack, while the all-wheel drive variants have 72.8 kilowatt hours,
Yeah.
which,
It hardly seems worth it, really.
to have two different battery packs, from a manufacturing perspective, that feels wrong. I think it must be something to do with software.
I don't know. I don't know if it's that or whether it's where the pack sits and the rear wheel drive motor sits.
Well, that's a good point, because, again, and this might be that the spec sheet is wrong, the official spec sheet that Toyota has given us says that this car can charge at up to 150 kilowatts from a CCS charging station. The all-wheel drive is only supposed to be capable of charging at up to 100 kilowatts.
And that, I think, ties in with what we've seen when we've been out travelling and seen BZ4Xs out in the wild, which is, I mean, a well-documented problem that their charging is somewhat lackluster.
I mean, we actually have anecdotal proof of that. If you remember, we were in LA not so long ago in the F-150 Lightning. We pulled up at a charging station, an eVgo charging station, and there were two BZ4Xs there, one of which had been there a while. It was at like 50%.
Yeah,
We rocked up with, I think we had 20
something like that. And then we charged and left before it was done.
before it was done charging.
And with this, today, I rapid charged it and I saw a peak of about 110, which does suggest that this is the vehicle that can charge faster than 100 kilowatts. But yeah, it ramped down pretty quickly. All right, so you've got 71-ish kilowatt hours of battery, and then you've got around 220 to 240 miles of range. What about power? Because that's kind of the biggie for this.
So you've got 150 kilowatts, which is the same as the Chevrolet Bolt, and
Yes.
about the same as your e-Niro.
Yes.
That's on the front-wheel drive version. If you opt, and I'm laughing because I don't understand Toyota's decision on this. If you go with the all-wheel drive version, you get 80 kilowatts at the front and 80 kilowatts at the rear.
Ah, so 160 kilowatts.
Yes.
Yeah, that doesn't feel worth it. You get a lot more torque.
Not really. I mean, so it's 196 pound-feet or 265 newton meters
Okay, so
for the front-wheel drive. If you go with the all-wheel drive, you have 124 pound-feet front and rear, which is 168 newton meters front and rear.
okay.
So it's really more a case of you're not buying it for extra power, you're buying it for extra traction.
Yeah, which is not necessarily in and of itself a bad concept.
And this has a snow mode, which Toyota should be really commended for. More EVs need snow mode. And if you think about this as a a Prius replacement, a vehicle that's going to be driven, I think, primarily by retired folks or parents, you need to be able to it's got more get out of trouble features than a lot of cars we've driven in this segment.
I think that's true. And I think when you think about where this car is likely to do well, the markets in which it's probably going to do well, particularly in the US, are going to be the coastal states. And particularly the northern coastal states, they get snow a lot.
The amount of luggage space in this car is pretty impressive.
Yeah.
There's a decent load bay space in the rear. It's, I think, 27.7 cubic feet or 778 litres.
That is pretty sizable. I'm not sure how that compares with...
I mean, it's bigger than the Bolts.
Yeah.
And I think it's probably bigger than the e-Niro. And I think it's probably not quite as big as the Model Y.
No, I don't think it is.
I mean, if you want luggage carrying capabilities, there are two cars at this price point. So this car, as we're sitting in it right now, is spec'd just below 50 grand US. There are two cars that definitely stand out when it comes to load carrying capability. And that's going to be the Mustang Mach-E, the rear-wheel drive version, because then you get more space up front, and the Tesla Model Y rear-wheel drive version, because again, you're going to get more space up front. If you want to carry a lot of stuff, those are the two cars you should be cross-shopping this against. And look, you can get a Model Y for less than this particular version of this car. The entry level of this would be cheaper than a Model Y. But I think if you were wanting range, charging capability, and the ability to have a more enjoyable driving experience, the Model Y would probably be a better bet.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like the Model Y is the more rounded vehicle in that sense.
This is going to be better in cities than the Model Y. And in terms of driving, I think this fits closer to the ID4 in terms of its maneuverability at low speed, especially because of that super lightweight steering, because it's, we'll come to that later, but it's drive-by-wire.
Yeah.
So I think that's definitely where it fits in. Obviously, the Mustang Mach-E has got terrible turning circle. This thing is incredibly tight. I think it's something like 40 feet.
It is 40 feet.
Which is 12 meters.
Yeah.
And that's really good, especially in America.
Well, especially for a vehicle that's also available as an all-wheel drive.
Being the Limited, you get electronically adjustable driver's seat, the passenger seat, no memory function.
Just a plain electronically adjustable seat.
And the passenger seat, certainly in this version, is manually adjustable. There's no glove box here. The glove box is way back here. You kind of have to reach in here to get it. And underneath this subfloor, there is another little compartment with all the documentation for the car in. That feels like a faff to get to.
It does, and this whole floating centre console, so this bit I kind of get, that seems to be de rigueur for a certain style of EV.
Right.
But down here, there's this huge centre tunnel.
It's almost like a boat floor, but not a boat floor because it's nowhere near the floor. And the tunnel itself is up. I wonder if the batteries are in there or if they've hidden some power electronics in there. Under the hood, there's a huge mess of wires, quite literally.
Yeah, it's not integrated. I mean, I was actually stunned looking under there because having seen how tidy the first gen RAV4 EV is and how well integrated...
With its little suitcase.
With its little suitcase, and how well integrated all the power electronics and the motor and everything were with that. Sort of opening this hood and finding this rat's nest of wires running hither and thither, I was a bit nonplussed because I kind of came to this thinking, well, this isn't really Toyota's first electric vehicle by a long way.
Right.
I mean, we mentioned that the second generation Toyota RAV4 is not really a Toyota, it's a Tesla, but still, I kind of expected them to come at this as, well, we've learned tons from our previous vehicles, here's our next one, and it feels more like a first try than a well sorted. I I mean, it is well sorted in the way that it drives, but in terms of the integration of the components,
It feels, I mean, the quality of the components is very good for the cabin. It's much better than the interior in, say, the Chevrolet Bolt EV. This feels a lot more like a Camry or a mid-range, mid-price Toyota. It's kind of got that Toyota feel and smell to it. That means the switchgear is going to have a certain level of reliability to it. And I think that's going to be one of the bonuses of this car. But this kind of almost, I don't know what to call this. It's textured dashboard. Feels like a weird choice that is slightly out of time. This feels anachronistic almost. It feels like something I'd expect in a car 20 years ago.
it does. It's kind of a weird choice, and I'm not sure how it's going to stand up in sunnier states,
Right.
where it feels like it might well fade. But it's not unpleasant. It's just different.
I like how everything is generally within easy reach, but in addition to the weird buttons like the snow mode and the eco mode button, which is way the heck over here, obviously in a right-hand drive car, it's right next to where you want it to be because the buttons don't move, I would assume, depending on the market you're in. There's a couple of blanks here, but there is one button that is worth noting, and that's up here on the touchscreen console, and these are all software-driven buttons apart from these center ones. And it's a heated front windscreen button.
Yes.
Yay!
They have learned something from their previous RAV.
So, Toyota, I think, is one of the few automakers to still make cars with electronically heated front windscreens. They are great because it means you can clear the windscreen very quickly on a cold day without needing to heat up the entirety of the cabin. And it's very efficient to do that as well.
Yeah, I mean, it means when you get into a vehicle, you don't have to wait for the heating system to spool up and get warm.
I've got to say though, Kate, I really like that heated windscreen. It was something that I was a fan of with my original RAV4 EV, and I'm glad to see it in this car as well. There is something I'm not super convinced about though, and that is that Qi wireless charging pad here in the center console. It's nice that you can put your phone in there and put it away from temptation, and I think that's probably why it's there, so you're not a distracted driver. But it barely fits my iPhone, it barely fits your phone. And there's a USB socket in there, which means if you need to use USB to charge, you've got a USB-A there. There's a couple of USB-Cs further down, but you then have to sort of hold your phone out because there's definitely no space here for you to get a cable in. So I guess it just assumes that you're using a smaller phone.
I think it does, and yeah, if you, for any reason, don't use wireless Android Auto or CarPlay, which this vehicle does have.
It took forever to set up, but yes, it does have it.
It does have it. Then yeah, you would have to have your phone somewhere else and this strange little pockety thing open.
And that's a bit weird.
Yeah, it's slightly inconvenient. But kudos to them, because the CarPlay and Android Auto implementation is very quick. At least it was for Android Auto. It was very responsive despite being a wireless system.
The other thing worth noting about the entertainment here, and this is kind of weird, is that you can have different sources for your audio that include Apple Music and Amazon Music.
Yeah.
So you can sign into your car and say, this is my Apple Music account, this is my Amazon Music account, and it will presumably stream it over a wireless connection without you needing to have your radio connected to your phone, which I think is quite nice. The thing that bugs me a little bit about this though, and I'll see if I can get back to it, is because this is a press car, this is set up as a guest, and there are certain functions that I don't know if they are persistent if you are signed in as a registered owner of the vehicle versus a guest. But every time we turn this car on, it defaults to all of the default settings, so it forgets whether it has regenerative braking applied or not. It forgets which mode it's in. I assume that if you are signed in as a registered user, it may remember some of those settings, but I can't say for sure because we only have the guest profile. that also means we can't test out any of the connected features.
No, that is always unfortunate with press vehicles, so that they rarely get around to setting up any kind of separate account for...
Porsche are good with that. Porsche
Yeah.
always give us full access to the vehicle, and that makes things really nice. The other thing that I've noticed is I haven't been able to find anywhere where it tells me what the state of charge is.
No.
There's no percentage.
No.
It's just a blue bar on the instrument cluster that slowly drops.
Yeah, it doesn't have an actual number that I can find anywhere.
It does have a miles remaining, so we've currently got 58 miles remaining. And on the center console here, we've got our miles per kilowatt hour. Looks like the best we've done was like maybe 6 miles per kilowatt hour. So right now your driver dash says 3 miles per kilowatt hour. I've not seen a whole much more than that. You said you saw a little bit higher, but...
Yeah, I've seen up to about 3.5 for like in-town short distance drives, but nothing higher than 3.1 or 2 really for long journeys.
There are some things about the interior that I think are going to be very good for families. There's a reasonable amount of space here at the back. I don't think anybody with long legs is going to be particularly comfortable back here. And it feels like the floor is quite high, so it feels like your knees are going to be up a ways. Certainly when I sat in it, that's the impression I got. It didn't feel like something that I'd want to spend a lot of time in. But for kids, I think this is a reasonably nice rear, hard wearing, not things that are going to get easily damaged. There are 2 AC vents behind the center console, and you have USB-C charging, but no 110 volt inverter, which is a shame. I thought that Toyota would include that.
Yeah, well, given the way that Japan often does a lot of work towards having inverters in vehicles for backup power, you would think that Toyota would have included that, and you would think that Toyota would have bidirectional CCS charging, but as far as I know, they do not yet.
And while the luggage space is good, there's no real underfloor storage. So what you see is what you get. You do get that 60-40 rear split seat, and you do get the ability to remove the pullable, I guess, tonneau cover for the rear load bay, which would be useful. You could get plenty of child things in the back, bikes or prams or pushchairs or whatever, without having too many problems.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing is that, like a lot of modern vehicles, the back end of this vehicle is kind of weirdly shaped. So while there is quite a large volume, some of it is in strange little cubby areas off to each side of the wheel arches, and then the top of the vehicle because it's tapered in. I mean, you know, if you want a vehicle that's a big chunky estate, this is not it.
No, and if you want a vehicle with a rear wash wipe, this is not it.
Yeah, that was very upsetting this morning.
I don't understand why the auto industry is doing it again and again and again. It seems to me like it's becoming a standard thing.
I'm guessing it's a cost saving because it's a whole mechanism. You've got a motor and so on that you can remove. You've got seals that go when you take that out, and you've got the switchgear that you can simplify. But it also is really not great for safety. I mean, pulling out of my driveway this morning, I ended up just trying to shuffle the car and then winding the rear windows down so I could peer out.
I don't know, Kate. I think maybe part of it is that a lot of people live on the coast and they live in cities, and they're not going to be at a point where they need to use a rear wiper in anger. We only need it because we live in the Pacific Northwest, and because we regularly drive on country roads. Your daily commute to your other job is along country roads. I live in the country, and so I guess you and I are more likely to get our cars dirty than the cars that drive, 5 or 6 miles every day to and from work, picking the kids up from school and running some errands. And that is ultimately what this car is aimed to do.
Yeah, it very much is a vehicle for doing the errands.
I don't know, Kate. I think, this is a bit like the original Prius and the next generation after that, and the Voyager. generation
And the Discovery.
and the Discovery, which came first. It's
Yeah.
very confusing. But all jokes aside, the interior of this car is pleasant, and I just think it's designed to be a Prius. Having swapped it out, I'm taking us along this road because I want to talk about the steering feel of this car and the fact that I think if you didn't know it was drive-by-wire, you wouldn't necessarily grok it instantly behind the wheel. I don't know how you feel about it.
I think that's true. I think that it's something that is designed to be very subtle. It's not an intentional thing that you're going to be like, oh, this car is drive-by-wire, because they don't want you to have that kind of shock experience driving it. It's got to be subtle.
I think that the feedback that we get from the steering system in this car is enough to convince you that there is a fairly good physical connection, but at the same time not enough to necessarily make you feel that the car is going to respond particularly enthusiastically when you go along a country lane quickly. And it has become very unsettled when I've pushed it on a country road.
Yeah, this isn't a vehicle that is intended to get your heart racing, and it's not a vehicle that particularly enjoys it. Like, you can push it along to make progress if you need to, and if that's the way that you drive, but it doesn't enjoy it. It doesn't feel like the vehicle really wants to do it, and you felt it there.
You felt it there. It was a little bit of unsettling at the back. It was a little bit whoa, a little bit way, and not necessarily in a Harry and Phil kind of way.
Yeah, no, it definitely doesn't inspire you to do that. But then I very much feel that this is a vehicle intended for someone who perhaps drives a Prius now. And that is also a vehicle, as a former Prius driver, that is also a vehicle that one does not hurry places.
Exactly. There's an incredible amount of understeer on this drivetrain.
Yeah, and I suspect that's, again, intentional.
I mean, we went into that corner. I was really having to move the steering wheel to get the car to go where I wanted it to. And I think that's going to be a challenge because, you know, if you go into a corner a bit quick, you're going to want more feedback and more response than I'm not going to turn as quickly as you want me to turn. Maybe that's just me.
I think it's really a driving style issue, in that this is not a car intended or marketed for you or for me.
That's true.
And when I was driving down today, I went through a section of road which I normally use to hustle through because it's a good way for me to test the vehicle's handling. And very quickly I went, no, this doesn't like it, and it's not particularly enjoyable to do that. So this isn't a vehicle that I'm gonna try and really push it, because it's not intended for that and it really feels it. Like other vehicles that we've had which have had this same kind of performance characteristics, like the rear-wheel drive EV6, which is not incredibly powerful in electric vehicle terms and doesn't have a really fast 0 to 62, that felt much more settled. It felt much more in control at speed. If you hustled it, it would do it. It didn't feel like you particularly wanted to do it. But this, it really kind of makes it known to you that that's not what it has in mind.
And let's be honest, Kate, if you're buying this, you're not buying a car because you want a performance car. You're buying a car that you want to be able to use to reliably go and do your daily commute, to run errands, to take kids to school, to, you know, go see your friends. This is not a long distance car because of that charging curve issue that is well documented. And I think Toyota deserves some praise for developing a car that doesn't egg you on, but rather allows you to exist within your own limitations. This is a car that tells you, are you sure you want to do that? As opposed to a car that goes, come on, come on, come on. And there are way too many EVs that do the come on, come on, come on. And I think there are a lot of people who either find that intimidating or lack the skill to be able to follow through on what the car wants you to do.
I think that's certainly true. I think a lot of the vehicles we've driven have enough power to get you out of trouble, but they also have plenty to get you into trouble.
Mm-hmm.
And this vehicle does not. This vehicle is much more restrained in its power delivery. And actually, we mentioned the original first generation RAV, and one of the things that they did with that throttle mapping was make it pretty gentle initially, and that is partly down to wanting to make sure the vehicle has a good long lifespan, because you're not stressing the battery so much, you're not stressing the drivetrain so much, but also it helps people who are not used to the kind of power delivery that we've seen in many vehicles that we've had, which is you can have all the power right now.
Mm-hmm.
And this delivers it in a much more measured way.
I want to give a shout out to the infotainment, because it just said, hey, you're preparing to enter a school zone, which is very good.
Mm-hmm.
But the bugbear I've had this week is that this car seems to assume that every rural road is 25 miles per hour, including the one I live on, which is definitely not a 25 mile per hour speed limit. Now, I know that there are probably some people who would like it to be a 25 miles per hour speed limit, and some of the local cyclists using it as a training ground would break that speed limit. But I would hope that they had figured that out by now and had figured out how to properly put a speed limit sign in, but in the case of Toyota, that's not happened.
No, it hasn't. And I think that's one of the things that you see increasingly, is that a lot of these companies, they're doing, to some extent, they're buying in their mapping, but they're doing their own head units. And I know that's a trend that we're seeing more of because companies want to do subscriptions,
Mm-hmm.
but they're just not that good at it. They're just not. It's not their raison d'etre.
And interestingly, although the car told me that we were entering a school zone, it still maintained the speed limit was 25 when in fact it had dropped down to 20. And I think that's something that you should bear in mind, because it means that you're not going to be able to rely on the warning in the car telling you what the speed limit is. And I can imagine that causing some arguments as well, because I know several couples who drive together who go, well, the car says the speed limit is 25, why are you doing 40? It's like, because it is at 40, we just passed the sign. Well, why does the car say it isn't? I'm also very bothered, is the right word, by the lack of one-pedal driving. And I know that's just me. I know that one-pedal driving is not everyone's cup of tea. But one-pedal driving kind of feels like a fairly standard thing these days.
Yeah, it doesn't have it at all. It has enhanced regeneration, which is something that you have to set every time you get in the vehicle, which I find quite irritating. I want it to be a preserved status setting.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that I found quite annoying, and this is not meant to be a big dig, this is something they can fix in software in an update, but it doesn't tell you. So when you have the car fully charged, because these are press cars and so their default is 100% state of charge it up to 100%, get in the car, press I want enhanced regen, and Toyota is not the only company that does this. It says that's not available.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't then say, but I'm going to apply the friction brakes to give you a driving experience that feels the same, which would be my ideal. But it also doesn't tell you when it's going to be available. So it's not available when the battery's fully charged, and that gives you no indication of when it will become available. And the only way I found to do it was just to be, I'll press it now. No, it's still not available. How about now? No.
I do say that the coast mode, if I take off this pedal, right, and then I coast, that's actually quite nice. And it reminds me a little bit of the Prius. So again, if you're driving this with the expectation that you're going to pulse and glide, do you remember learning how to pulse and glide?
I do.
I feel that if you want to get the actual EPA approved range out of this, which feels completely unachievable based on our driving experience this week, I think the only way you're going to do that is by pulsing and gliding, which is what I'm doing right now. So you kind of put your foot on the throttle, you come over the top of a hill, you let off, you let the car coast back down, and that's a very different experience to using your single pedal driving, or in this case your, what's it called, enhanced regenerative braking?
It's something like that. It has a very long name. A lot of the messages that appear on the screen are very long.
But other than that, look, the throttle response is pedestrian.
Yes.
The braking is a little bit snatchy if you are in single pedal mode or enhanced regenerative braking mode.
Yeah, and if you have hold mode on, it is very vigorous to put the hold on when you get near a stop.
And it makes the car kind of just go oof, like that.
Yeah.
Which does feel a bit nasty. But we just came along that little gravel road cut through there, and it feels pretty good. This is, though, where I feel this car underperforms, right? We're looking to merge here. We're waiting to see if there's a big van coming. I'm going to floor it now. It gets out of its own way, but it's not... I would like to see a little bit more power. That said, the cabin's a reasonably nice place to be.
It is. It's a very Toyota-y place. It's well put together. The materials feel pretty solid. Not high-end, but
Yeah.
comfortable. There is an ocean of piano black, which is not ideal in a car which is really clearly targeted at kids and families. Well, the car's not targeted at kids, but families with kids.
Families with kids. Interestingly, though, there is something I've noticed, and I don't know if you've picked it up, and that is that other road users react very differently to me driving this than driving other cars we've had on press loads. So right now, I am just about at the speed limit. We've had more people overtake us in this car than we've had any other vehicle we've reviewed. And I'm not sure if it's because of the car. I'm not sure if it's because this car has a Texas license plate on the back, because it's a press car. It comes from the Texas press fleet. Didn't drive here, obviously, it was on the back of a trailer. But I don't know. It feels like this car has a bit of a bullseye painted on it.
Yeah, I hadn't really noticed that, but now that you mention it today, yeah, there has been a lot of more aggression pointed at this vehicle.
Than even a Chevy Bolt.
Than even a Bolt, which, well, Bolts around here are 10 a penny.
Right.
But this is, I suspect it falls into the people think of it in the same genre as a Prius.
And that might be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on...
Yeah.
In terms of tech, there is a lane keep assist in this version of the car. There is radar-assisted cruise control. Seems to be pretty accurate. The way you set it, there are some nice buttons down here, and it's reasonably simple to use all of the buttons. But again, it has some weird messaging. Like if you try and engage lane keep assist and then you put your adaptive cruise control, here it goes, adaptive cruise mode active, pay attention to other vehicles.
So this, like a lot of vehicles, it wants some steering input, even though it's actually pretty good at staying in its own lane. So you kind of have to nudge it every so often. If you haven't nudged it enough, then it puts up a very long message explaining that the steering system is going to stop assisting you in a bit if you don't do something. And the first time it came up, I was like, what the hell is that? And I spent far too much time reading it and not paying attention to the road, instead of just going, oh, you want me to jog with the steering wheel? Fine. Yeah, I'm still here and I'm still holding it. Do
you think that the it's a cultural thing. You know, this is a Japanese car. It is very, to me, it's very Japanese in its design language. It seems to emphasize proper function over a lot of other things that people might find more enjoyable.
I don't know. I mean, actually, the messaging thing, it may be that comes across in one or two symbols in Japanese and then ends up being strung out into quite a long sentence in English. But I'm surprised that wasn't caught in the design process and someone said, maybe we should make this shorter and snappier, like hold the steering wheel.
Yes. You and I are in a very unique position reviewing this car, Kate, because you and I have both owned an original RAV4 EV.
Yep.
And we've both owned second generation Priuses.
Yes.
I've actually owned 3. You've owned 1. And the familiarity behind the wheel in this car with all of those vehicles is very clear.
Yeah, this is a vehicle that if you're coming from another Toyota product, if you have maybe a somewhat tired at this point second generation Prius, you step behind the wheel of this car, you're going to feel right at home.
Right down to the acceleration.
Yeah, I mean, I said to you, I think the first thing I said when I described this car to you, or my experience of it, was that it was aggressively fine. It is sufficient. It does what you need it to. It doesn't do anything more. It doesn't do anything less. It will take you to work. It will take you to school. It will take you on moderate length journeys without too many rapid charging stops.
Yeah, the rapid charging on this is really limited, I would say, to 60%. Once you get to about 60%, you're like, come on, it's
Yeah,
time for us to go.
It's impressive for a vehicle that has 150 kilowatt charging that it takes as long as my 77 kilowatt
Right?
charging EV with a smaller battery to reach 80%.
Fast charging aside though, the driving dynamics is very Prius without that screaming hybrid engine drivetrain. Like when you put your foot down, you don't get that wind up of the petrol engine that you get in the hybrid, obviously, but you do get that same lag.
Yeah, they've built in like a quarter-second pause as you press the go pedal that you just wait. You're like, let's go, and it goes, uh-huh.
But for someone who's coming to this car, who's transitioning from petrol to electric, maybe via a Prius, maybe not. This is actually close to a petrol car, a gasoline car, than a lot of EVs we've driven. And it seems to be marking a trend in the EV space as mainstream automakers come on board and they're making the fun performance cars first, and then their second EV is dumbed down for the masses.
I think one of the things that we said when we first drove the rear-wheel drive EV6 was that it felt like, to me, it felt like an early 2000 Cavalier. And this is the Toyota equivalent of that. It's a vehicle which you can give to someone who has driven gas cars that are a few years old now, getting a little long in the tooth. They're reaching the end of that 12-year cycle of replacement, and they will get in it and they will not plant themselves headfirst in a tree, because unlike a lot of the vehicles that we've seen up till this point, which have that acceleration like that, yeah, it doesn't have that, but it is extremely comfortable and it is very pleasant.
You could unsettle it if you travel along windy country lanes at speed. I mean, I took this up over Rocky Point Mountain Pass, not far from me. It's not called Rocky Mountain Point Pass. Locals will know where I mean. And I regularly take press cars up there to see how quickly I can get up and down the mountain. And this was having none of it. The tyres were scrabbling for track, for turn. The brakes were locking up. It's not a performance car.
No.
But for going to work, for picking the kids up from school, for taking your grandmother out for a Sunday afternoon drive or a cup of tea somewhere, this is actually so unoffensive, right?
Yeah.
That it is not going to upset anybody. I think it's fair to point out that Michael, who is a car person, took this for 2 days and was like, actually, this is a pretty good car. I like driving this. I like the function. It does what I expect it to do. Would he pick it as a car to have fun in? Absolutely not. There's no fun.
No,
Fun is almost
this is a fun-free zone, but that's not necessarily a particularly bad thing.
And I think people very often criticize us when we review cars because we're like, it's not fast, it's not fun. But for most people, that's not why they buy a car. They buy a car to get from point A to point B. Look, it's a Toyota. So many garages around the world. This car is going to be easy to get service parts for, because I'm pretty sure that Toyota will come along and make sure that all of its hybrid certified dealerships are certified to work on this. I'm sure there's going to be a homogeneity of parts between this and other Toyota badged vehicles. Of course, the Subaru Solterra, the Lexus 450e, they all share this same platform. So it's going to be an easy car to get spares and repairs for. The inside of this, for what it's worth, is better built than the Chevrolet Bolt EV. It's less funky than the ID4. It's not quite as futuristic as, say, the EV6 or the Ioniq 5. It's not going to be, Tesla Model 3 or Model Y levels of alienation.
Well, it definitely doesn't have that minimalist interior, even though a lot of its buttons are on the touchscreen. It still feels of an era.
And for the price is the price problem I have. This, as we are driving it today, this particular model starts at 45-ish thousand US dollars. This particular variant, spec'd up with the bells and whistles it's got, because it's just a front wheel drive, it's not the most expensive. But even with just front wheel drive, it's pushing 50 grand.
Yeah.
And that seems to push it out of the price point for anybody who wants to road trip, who wants to go long distances, who wants to use it for anything other than commuting. But for around town, it's a Toyota.
Yeah.
I mean, this almost feels like a Camry.
It does.
The Camry of EVs.
It totally is.
It's not a car. I mean, you don't buy a Camry to get excited about driving, right? You buy a
Camry,
Supra or something else.
You buy a Camry because you need to get somewhere and you need something reliable to do
and
it.
it's not going to break. It's not going to break down. I have some words about all of the nonsense under the bonnet.
Yeah.
The level of arrangement of components. It feels almost like they just dumped a bunch of components in and went, there you go. But other than that, to phrase an old British television advert, it does what it says on the tin.
Yes. And on that note, we're done with today's video. If you have comments, drop us a polite note in the Discord chat room, on Mastodon, or if you're a Patreon supporter, in the comments there. If you want more, subscribe, hit the bell and follow the links below to regularly support us with a YouTube membership or a Patreon subscription. You'll also find links to our Ko-fi, Bitcoin and our swag store, as well as that aforementioned Mastodon server.
Scrolling on our right is the list of amazing charged up supporters, and shout outs go out to our V2G Patreon supporters. Pedro Mora Pinheiro, Alan Tupper, Andrew Martin, Bennett Elder, Brophy Wolf, Chris Mackrell, Cyprian Laplace, Dan Blair, Gordon C, Hey Esker, S on Trammell, Kyle Fox, Mark Eggleton, Peter Dillinger, Ray Jean Fellows, Sean Tucker, Stefan Fremgen, Stephen Williams, Taslet in the Gong, Paul Bricknell, Tony Moss, Carl Hodgson, Chris the Centaur, Denny Hyde, Lance Schlau, Linda Irish, Mike Weeder and Paul Nelson. And finally, big thanks to our off-grid supporters, Paul Conway, Kevin Burrowbridge, Stephen O'Donoghue, Jim Burness, Robert Flannery, Aaron Hahn, Ellery Hensley, Rory Litwin, JP Fagerback, Dave Kitchen, Andrew Glenn, Anonymous Freak, Chris, Michael Johnson, Clay Witt, CPU Freak 101, Eric Knack, Joe Bresney, Joe Hughes, John Henderson, Laura Reynolds, Marcel, Matthew Drobnak, Nigel S, Reggie Watts, Will Graylin, and of course,
Ian!
Don't forget that we make content every Monday, Wednesday, Friday and Saturday on the main channel. Plus over on Take 2, our chicken and garden updates and Sunday musing every Sunday. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep evolving.